My name is Fred DePriest. I live in the Southside NCO area, the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay. And the purpose of this video is to share with you recommendations that have been made to the city to remove parking from some streets in the NCO, change speed limits and change speed limits in some areas. What has occurred over the last year is that, of course, we've had state legislation passed in anticipation of that. The city began looking about a year ago at different ways that we could manage the impact that much higher densities of occupants in houses are going to have on city infrastructure, safety, and street safety in particular, because of the parking that will come with that. They sought public input over the last year, and then in November of 2025, a few months ago, they proposed to the city council that we establish criteria for safe street widths. If you have this street width, you should have no more than this amount of parking, one side, two sides, either side, and so forth. That was approved along with a process for which neighborhoods or residents can seek that. It is citizen initiated, must be. And so I and a few other people have kind of taken on the effort to initiate what we think, based on those criteria, makes sense for Southside. They are purely safety criteria, and we may have many other reasons, and you may, for wanting to do more things around parking, but these are those that are supported by the city based on safety alone, minimum safety expectations for streets. So altogether, we have sort of three buckets of things. We've identified, gone out and literally measured our street widths, identified those that are less than 27 feet, which the city says should have no parking at all, and we're recommending removing that parking. Most are on the west side and the country lanes with no curbs, and there are some other issues with those as well, but they're not safe for to have parking on. The second is to eliminate parking on Fairview on one side in anticipation of a bike lane. Now, part of the new guidelines are if you have a bike lane, you should not have parking on both sides, or it essentially works out that way. So we don't have a bike lane, but the city is considering putting one in next spring. And what we're saying on that is let's accelerate that because it's already truly unsafe. Fairview is unsafe when you look at what's going on there. And I'll show you more detail on all of these recommendations. And thirdly, reduce the speed limit generally throughout the NCO from 30 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour. And again, all of these are probably related in some fashion to the increasing density of students, not necessarily within the NCO, but all in the areas surrounding us, which are going to become much more dense. And we are where those students come to get away from it, in a sense. In 2020, and I just want to briefly mention this, in 2020, there was a proposal made to remove about the first two rows of housing from the Southside NCO along Bush and replace it with commercial businesses. City Council, unanimously vetoed that or did not approve it. But that event caused many of us across the neighborhood to it was a bit of a warning, a reminder that kind of proposal is made about every 3 or 4 years, and as far back as you can remember. The council in 20 said, no, the path we want this to be on is the one it's already on, which you are our last intact historic area, and every city needs that kind of historic beating heart. Now, so we as a neighborhood have done many activities since 2020 to promote that, strengthen that market identity, and we have changed the trajectory, and it's largely one lot at a time, moving back toward a more residential. The parts that were becoming rental or the market is deciding that it is more economic and makes more market sense for those to be moving back toward residential, and that's what's happening truly. Well, what other thing that's happened though with this incredible increase in density around this is that we are even more aware that we are where the students come to get away from that density. Those unsafe streets with cars just packed down on the high occupancy in those houses that have no yards now. It's all concrete and so forth. They come here to walk, to jog, and those of us who live here, we know how important this is to the students. You see almost all day, every day, that the vast majority of usage of these safe, comfortable places are for the students surrounding us to come here and have a place to come to for that. And so we're also aware of that. And we're not seeking to reduce the student occupancy in the NCO, inside the NCO. And we visit with anybody, and we like students. They create a lot of our neighborhood's character and make it vibrant and really a better place to live, truthfully. At the same time, we don't want to lose the reason that they want to live here and why we're important to everyone around us. So in November, what happened was this process was created. It must be citizen initiated. We have to say what we want. And then the city staff will do their analysis of the safety and measure street widths and do these things. And eventually it's proposed to the city council. There will be public input throughout that process. Works very similar to any zoning change. So if you have other ideas, then you're going to have an opportunity to voice those, provide that feedback to city staff, and influence what really happens here. Now, we've talked at all kinds of neighborhood gatherings informally about parking and what changes we might make for a year now. And 5 or 6 of us have kind of formed a group where we talk to each other as well as other neighbors. And I think the things we're recommending have a fair amount of neighborhood consensus around it. But again, there will be public input and an opportunity for you to continue to alter what we've submitted to the city. And please, take advantage of that and do that if you have other thoughts. These are the widths and the safe limits. The primary one for us is that the city said any street under 27 feet is probably not safe to have parking on either side. And so all we've done is just measure the street width and recommended those less than 27 feet without any more complicated argument than that. Okay. And I would note, when you measure your street width, it's from the outside top edge of the curb, not the inside of the curb to the other side. Some confusion over that. 27 feet is not a new requirement. The city, it's been the city standard for building new neighborhoods for a long time. So 27 is pretty common, and parking on one side, which is allowed for streets between 27 and 32, is pretty much the standard throughout all new neighborhoods in the city. We have Fairview, which is over 32, which allows parking on both sides. But if you have a bike lane, which is what is proposed for Fairview, then you need to think in more detail about whether that makes sense. And generally speaking, you're only going to have parking at a minimum one side, if not eliminate both. So there was a lot of discussion a year ago because of Senate Bill 1567 about using parking to limit occupancy in houses. And within a month, we realized that was not going to didn't make sense. It simply wouldn't do it. And the reason is that College Station has large lots. The way that taking parking off the street might limit occupancy is that the owner of a rental unit then has to provide parking on the lot for those people. Well, that parking is limited by how much impervious coverage the city allows on the lot, which is more than 55% of the lot or 50% of the front yard. So in a roundabout way, taking parking off the street could limit, say, a house to 4 people. Well, I've gone through the city, all the lots, every individual lot in the entire city, single family lot, done some reasonable calculations about how much room there is for parking. And the reality is our lots are fairly large throughout the whole city and particularly in the Southside NCO. Very little of the city would be limited to less than 6 occupancy. In other words, they could put 6 places of concrete on the lot and not violate the impervious coverage. Um, our lots can have far more than that, and most of our lots. Now, this is a color coding of all of our lots. The boundary of the Southside NCO is this dark, thick black line. You can see that anything that's more than red can park more than 6 vehicles. It's not any shade of red. Well, most are large enough that you're really in the 8 to 10 vehicle range, which is already limiting occupancy, given what we have in the neighborhood. We do have about 11 homes out of 257 in the NCO that are what we would call ag shack stealth dome architecture. They were literally built to break the law. And when they were built, they put in enough parking for the number of people they plan to have in those homes. So those, none of those appear to be constrained either by the impervious coverage rule. So really what it comes down to is just a handful of very small lots, less than 6,500 square feet, which are colored in green here. We look specifically at those, and I tell you that they appear that they most can handle 6 without violating impervious. A few might be limited to 4, but they're very small houses that almost none of which have ever had more than 2 renters. So we're not affecting, and then there's only 2 lots that are yellow. My wife and my lot, and then one other small one that was kind of a sliver created by moving some streets around years ago. So there's not really an impact in the Southside NCO due to our lot sizes. Now, that's not our intent to have an impact on how many people are living in a house relative to what lives there now already. In the future, even these small lots, some of these are older homes that they were torn down and replaced by the investor with a higher occupancy house. Those are such that they could have at least 6 vehicles, even on our smaller lots, with a purpose-built house and parking for it. Okay, so specifically then, the recommended streets that will be affected are these. They're less than 27 feet in width, and that is the basis for removing parking. Now, most of these are actually those narrow asphalt country lanes, and they have other issues. But just straight up, we just simply identified those less than 27, and we're saying make those consistent with the city's safety guidelines. So I've got a drawing here which may help you visualize what we're talking about a little better. This is the northern area of the NCO, and then I'll show you the western area, which is mostly College Park, here in a minute. So in the northern area, all the blue streets here, we're not recommending any changes at all in any of the blue streets. Most have parking on one side. They're greater. Most are greater than 27 feet. Parking is allowed on one side, 27 to 32, and most already have parking on one side. The only streets we're changing are a little extension off of Suffolk and the Newton Street, which is, again, these are 2 little country lanes, and no one parks on those anyway, truthfully. So let's just codify that, put up a sign and say, make it clear that it's not allowed. So really no impact. Now, blue just means we're not changing it. There are some blues that are have already eliminated parking from both sides. Let's see if I can select those here. And I'll change the color to show you which those are. That street, all of Dexter, and because of the geometry and how it winds and all the student traffic on it, those are already have removed parking from both sides. So what I'm showing you now is not a map of what we're proposing to change, but what we will end up with if this is approved. Dexter has had no parking for many, many years, and I don't think anyone would propose to put any on it. Instinctively, just looking at it and traffic down. So really, not much change to speak of for the eastern area of the NCO. Most of the change is going to be over here on the western side. The red streets are those that are proposing to change, and again, the blue we will leave as is. Few of that has no parking already, but whatever it is, we're going to leave it as is. So the change for the city is just the red streets to consider. Based on width. So these are almost all those country lanes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Other country lanes have already been changed and have no parking, so I'll show you which areas those are. And Old Jersey. If our recommendations for the additional streets are accepted or approved, then the neighborhood will end up looking like this. The red will have no parking. The blue will have parking on one side. So an important point to make is that these streets have never been safe. And again, they're country lanes for the most part, but also those that aren't country lanes like Curry, which is a nice wide street with curves. Anywhere that you are in a home, you're within walking distance of parking, overnight parking, 24/7 parking. And I think that's important that it works out that way. Again, if you do have overnight guests, weekend guests, and you have no parking on the red streets, they are not very far from walking from a blue street, parking their car and coming. But again, the lots are large enough that the owners have the option to provide parking, not only for the number of people who rent there, but also guests. And that is something that they can consider. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It can just be compacted gravel, extension off the driveway and that sort of thing. So that is the proposal. Now, I'm showing it as blue. We are proposing a change in Fairview right here. And but not removable of all parking, just it still have parking. It'll just be one side instead of two. Okay, so the streets that we're removing parking from are mostly these country lanes again. They have no curbs and they're so narrow that instinctively, not because they're trying to do damage, but instinctively, anyone that parks there tries to get off on the grass. And they end up with half a vehicle into someone's yard. And it's all of these streets and damage is being done, to private property and yards and there's, it degrades the appearance of the neighborhood and its attractiveness to the marketplace as well. Yeah, there are those issues, but they are simply too narrow to have parking on them. And you can imagine trash day when the entire street becomes a one-lane street. And again, bicycles, e-boards, pedestrians, scooters, this is where they're flowing through. Now, in addition to that, we're going to have the work on the exchange at Welborn and Bush coming up. When that intersection shuts down at Welborn and Bush for maybe a good part of 3 years, Google, is going to send everybody down Fairview, or they're going to find ways they'll find ways of flowing through the neighborhood on these country lanes. And that's going to happen. And what it does is it increases the risk to pedestrians, e-boarders, scooters, and all that. If we haven't removed the parking from the sides of those streets that are already unsafe based on the standards. The second recommendation is Fairview to remove parking from this east side. That's a basic recommendation. That is within those guidelines for streets that have a bike lane. We don't have one yet, but this is where the bike lane will most likely end up. That proposal to do that is, it's been worked on, and there's some preliminary plans for that. The preliminary plan is to make this one-way vehicle coming in on Fairview, one-way vehicle going out on Montclair, and put a bike lane on each and leave parking on one side. Something like that. But that's not approved, and we don't know how that plan will actually end up. What we do see is that this is already unsafe right now. If the Fairview is. And we would recommend that we go ahead and kind of look down that path a little bit and make some change now to make this safe now, as soon as we can proceed it. We're not traffic specialists or experts on what makes a street safe or unsafe, but we would like to ask the city to consider accelerating that decision, at least to the degree that they can. And the bike lanes we're talking about here are going to be pretty elaborate and expensive, and we don't know when it's going to happen. This is unsafe right now. In addition, we would like to see a reduction in speed limit throughout the NCO from 30 generally to 25. We have some 25 already, and it's not noticeably different in terms of feeling like you're driving slow. But it is noticeably different in terms of how people behave in a 25-mile-an-hour zone versus a 30. And again, all of this flow is going to come through Southside with the construction, but even now we're dense. And even now, what makes all these students, it provides them a place to come to that feels good. What feels good is country lanes, asphalt, safe streets, and we want to keep it that way. 25-mile-an-hour speed limit will address. There aren't many people that drive faster than 25 on the south side, except those that do. And I think psychologically that is a speed limit that probably gets their attention and alerts them that, hey, this is a place where you need to be a little bit more careful. Now, Fairview would recommend dropping from 35 to 30. Again, a little more reaction time. And Fairview is we've got scooters, we've got e-boarders, pedestrians, two-way traffic, pretty intense on, special days at the campus. But really, the more dangerous time is day in and day out, every day, with people parked on both sides, drivers going too fast, and not having the reaction time needed to react to e-boarders coming in and out behind parked cars and the things that you see happen, and a lot of near misses. So those are our three recommendations, and we have made those to the city, submitted those. And again, there'll be a process, public comment, and I would encourage you to watch for that and participate in that if you have other thoughts. And I would say I feel there's a fair amount of consensus across the residents on these things. Maybe not as much consensus on some things that would go further than that. But we don't have an HLA or representative government, and your input is very important. We may decide that we may move toward, a different consensus depending on what people think. Okay, thank you, and I appreciate you spending some time thinking about this and being involved. Thank you.